Hi, everybody. Welcome to the SIG testing meeting, the Kubernetes SIG testing meeting for Tuesday, January 28th. I am your host, Aaron Krickenberger. We are all being publicly recorded, so we should all adhere to our best code of conduct as laid out by the Kubernetes community, which basically boils down to don't be a jerk. On the agenda for today's meeting, Catherine's going to talk to us a little bit about the work she has done in improving proud job visibility. And then Antonio, I believe you had a number of items, and we probably have room if anybody else has stuff they want to raise. So with that, I will hand it over to Catherine.
Okay, cool. Hi. So I guess I am going to talk about things I've been doing to make it easier for users to understand what is going on with their proud jobs. There is a document that is not very long, linked in the agenda, which I am not going to present because it's not worth the effort. But basically, the idea is that proud jobs can often fail in ways that are not obvious to the people who are trying to run their jobs, like the image doesn't exist, or they have misconfigured their volumes, or something along those lines, or the node just decides it doesn't like things being scheduled to it today. So the idea is that by reporting more information more consistently about proud jobs, we can indicate to users in the job viewer UI that something has gone wrong. So as part of this, I have added reporters that ensure that started and finished files always get reported, so you always know that your job started and always know that your job finished. We upload the proud job to GCS alongside the artifact, so you know what the job was, and we can upload the pod info and events so that you can reconstruct what happened to the pod as well. All of that is in now and can be turned on with a bunch of new config flags, and is enabled on the Kubernetes prow. And soon I will have a viewer that is similar to effectively kubectl describe, and also the status thing at the top of Spyglass, the job viewer will start showing helpful hints along the lines of, it looks like your job couldn't pull this image. Check what image you wanted to pull and that you have access, or something along those lines. Yeah, that is pretty much it.
So is it going to look like Clippy?
Probably not, but it could. If anyone feels like drawing me a Kubernetes Clippy.
Sounds great.
Steve, I'm curious, is this something that you have enabled on the OpenShift Prow instance at all?
No, not yet, but we will, absolutely.
Okay. Cool.
I imagine that this will become part of the like started.yaml, the starter YAML file that we have. I'd imagine that most anybody who's running a normal Prow instance is going to want these features.
I would imagine so, although first we'll have to update the starter YAML file to have any resemblance to what a modern Prow cluster should look like, which it kind of doesn't today.
Okay, and so people can find these additional files in the artifacts link off of Spyglass, is that correct?
That is correct, although they are more optimized for machine reading than human reading. But the machine reading part isn't there yet, and humans can read them, so.
Okay, cool. Thank you for that update, Catherine. Any other questions for Catherine? All right. Antonio, you want to talk to us about master detection for E2E testing?
Well, actually, this was Ben that put me in one channel, and And well, I vaguely remember in one pull request talking about this, but I just wanted to follow up to see if, I don't know, we can unblock this. At least we are using kubeadmin, and kubeadmin has this awareness of master role with the labels. Well, some of the tests are not running because of this. It's not allowed. I think that Lubomir is in the core. Maybe he can.
The original argument from Clayton, first of all, I don't understand exactly what problem you're having, but the original argument from Clayton is that Kubernetes core does not understand what is a master node. There's no concept of that. So some of the deployers have this master role label, and this is completely customized. And his work was to completely remove this role from the testing framework and from core.
Okay.
So can you clarify what the problem is exactly?
Well, the problem is that some end-to-end test needs this role. Well,
I think we had an issue somewhere walked about this, and
yeah.
the consensus was that the tests that depend on this are badly designed.
Okay.
And we should redesign them.
Okay, so the consensus is to rewrite the test, not to use the label. Okay, well, that was an easy one.
Does that sound right to you, Ben?
I know at least some of them. It doesn't make much sense that it's even checking for this.
Right.
It feels like some kind of misoptimization to say, oh, well, only if this particular kind of node is present am I going to move forward. At least the ones I looked at could just probe for the pod they're interested in being registered instead of the node.
I guess I don't have a deep background in the specific tests that depend on this, but I'm guessing there could be some tests that assume they have access to like the controller manager or the scheduler, and that's why they're seeking the master node role.
Yeah, they're well. So that right now it's particularly bad. They're looking for like a master suffix on the node name, which is super brittle and non-portable, and they're using that to gate doing things. The bigger problem is it's going to be difficult to say that we definitely can just redesign all of these, because even finding all of them is a pain. They're not all, there's one or two methods in the framework for doing this, but they're not all using that. A few are doing inline things. But so far the ones I've found, I think we can just remove that check more or less.
Okay. And I apologize for being slow, but so to restate the problem we're trying to solve here, like these tests are potentially poorly written and deprecated. Is the problem that they currently don't work for kubeadmin because it doesn't have the concept of master nodes?
Well, no, the problem is that they often depend on the name of the node. So they work with like kubeup, and they don't work reliably for anything else because like a master is a deprecated term in Kubernetes that we're not using anywhere. Even that label is pretty much slated to go away. So the question is just, do they need more accurate detection, or like, what do we want to do there? Because there are a bunch of things going on in the test framework that make this assumption that you can look for a node ending with it's approximately something like a node ending with master in the name of the node object as a gating mechanism for doing more things, like grabbing metrics.
Sure, I'm just trying to maybe understand why, for example, we wouldn't want something like modifying the check for whether something is let's call it a control plane node. If we could modify that check to do more than just look at the name of the node, like it could see if there is a label applied to the node, which it sounds like is what kubeadmin does.
Yeah, well, so we did discuss that route previously work on that was shot down because of Clayton's effort to remove having a role label from core. There were also some few places in actual Kubernetes components that were keying off this very non-granular label to change behavior. There are a few more granular labels that are respected now, but they're not related to that specifically.
Okay.
Like this node is excluded for incoming traffic or something like that.
I guess I'm just curious, like, how is this tripping you up, Antonio?
Well, because somebody wanted to run this test with kind, and kind used the names kind, contour plane, kind, whatever, and the test was looking for master 0, master 1. And well, this discussion is not a big deal, you know, it's just because it was just curious about that. But if it's the solution is to rewrite the test, it's okay with me. If I have time,
blocks some extended. Sorry, it blocks some extended testing behavior from working properly, and so the question was just like, where should we change things? I mean, we could rename the nodes in kind, but that doesn't seem productive. Like, we want to move away from that naming. There's been a long-standing discussion about that. So the question was just like, how do we want to approach this and the tests, this tech debt where we're keying off a node name? Do we want to replace it with labels or just like replace it with some entirely other kind of check? And what would be accepted since one or two previous attempts were blocked on the labels?
Okay. I guess I feel like, you know, our default option is to say those tests are poorly written and we're not going to bother to get them to pass on kind. But what I don't really fully understand would be the scope of what are these tests and what, you know, can they be rewritten to use alternate mechanisms. And assessing the scope of that sounds like what the next step would be.
We'll put it a different way. The easiest thing to do would just to be adding some more detection for like labels or something in these standard functions. That's a pretty small change. However, if that's not a route we want to go, then we do need to look at how do we rewrite these.
Okay. I personally don't have a great answer to this. I mean, I kind of don't necessarily see something terribly wrong with a label that is purposed for the tests to know what they can and cannot hit. I do think ideally these checks should be as granular as possible so that they wouldn't have to rely on the blanket check or concept of a master node or a control plane node. And they could ask for what it is they're looking for specifically, but it seems like something that would have to be evaluated on a case-by-case basis.
That sounds fair.
So we can certainly, I can take an action item to make sure that our end-to-end test docs say that like we will not accept new tests that look for a master node or look for the concept of a master node. And as follow-up, we can decide if, you know, some of these tests are worth rewriting.
And I think for like, I'm not sure how much effort we want on this. We probably want some of them just for like the purposes of we want to make sure Kubernetes is working for Kubernetes. But for example, for conformance, I mean, we can't guarantee access to any of these components. So,
of course,
and that seems to be the main area where, you know, people are investing time in the tests right now.
Okay. So Antonio, what I'm gonna, I think you can move on to your next item, but to me, it sounds like we want to at least verify that none of the conformance tests look for this. We should say that no new end-to-end tests should be looking for this role. And we can reevaluate whether any of the existing tests should be rewritten, or if we're comfortable with them just not being testable by other providers such as Kind or kubeadmin. Sound good?
Well. Yeah, also Lubomir added a link with a more in-depth discussion. Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Lubomir. Okay, next item.
Yeah, this is an interesting topic because it's about using the skip unless provider is. And because there are some tests that only can run in some cloud providers, but well, the history with the cloud providers is well known. They are supposed to be out of 3, but they are not out of 3. So, and I have this pull request blocked because of this. People are arguing about not using skip unless provider is another. So I don't know how to move forward. If we accept this or we remove the test.
So that to add a little bit more context, the particular test is checking the addresses on nodes to see that they have both an IPv4 and IPv6 for dual stack clusters.
Yeah,
right. My question is that actually a valid requirement that we expect of clusters? And if so, then why does it need to check on providers? And to add a little bit more context to what the provider check is, it's not doing something like finding out what external cloud provider you're doing. You actually tell the test binary a string provider name that is something like GCE or AWS, and then it magically changes the test behavior based on that. And that means that, say, KOps versus EKS is also the same thing to the test. I don't know where we get a more, I was hoping here might be a place where we could get a more official response on that. I think this is a thing we should stop doing. Besides the fact that we're trying to remove cloud providers, the provider concept seems broken given that it is just a string and isn't really mapped to any particular concrete concept of a provider anywhere. In the past, it mapped to KubeUps providers, but that doesn't really make sense anymore, given that basically the only KubeUp clusters being used are GCE and everything else is a mixture of different provisioning tools and external or internal cloud providers.
I don't fully agree with that. So this is the best example. Dual stack is a feature that nobody knows how it's going to end. And this test was added because the Azure people was developing it. So they decided their nodes are going to have an IPv4 and IPv6. It's a feature of Kubernetes. The problem is that in Kubernetes in Azure has different behavior for kubelet nodes IPs that in bare metal. And that's in the...
Sure, I agree that it's a Kubernetes behavior then.
I mean, I guess my question is, it sounds like the concept of provider that we're bumping up against is like, it's giving us different test code. I'm wondering how we could have the concept of provider allow the tests to call through to the concrete cloud provider implementation that is driving a given cluster if the concrete cloud provider implementation is what is required in order to get network information for a given node.
So what's worse is a few things do try to do that also based off of a mapping from the string key that is lost feed.
Okay.
But in this case, I'm actually more specifically even questioning the concept of having a test that checks if there's a specific set of addresses on the nodes when this is a thing that isn't actually like it's specific to the deployment. It feels like we're testing the way that the vendor chose to implement this as opposed to Kubernetes.
Okay, I got the point. So you say that maybe they added this only to work on their crowd, and that's fair enough. So we shouldn't put tests that verify that Kubernetes work in a specific cloud provider. Okay.
Well, I would even say maybe that a cloud provider works, but this seems like kind of an odd one where it isn't so much validating that as validating their configuration. Like it is a choice to have this specific set of addresses assigned. It doesn't really relate. I don't think it relates to it working or not, but also more broadly, like I think there needs this meeting might not be the right place, but I think there needs to be more discussion around the provider mechanism in the tests. It's been difficult to get consensus on that.
No, but I understand now your point. I think that that's correct. I will talk with the people that introduced the test and well.
This might solve only your case with the IPv6 dual stack support, but for instance, SIG storage tests have this check all over the place because of the volume specifics for different providers. I think the overall consensus was that the framework should be agnostic in terms of providers. And this requires code organization changes. It's doable, but it's a major factor to do properly. If you want to remove this function, what I'm saying.
Yeah, and so I'm wondering, so like if that is a desirable thing, maybe we should try to avoid it for completely new code, like in this case, even if maybe we're not quite prepared to rip it out from all of the existing code.
I mean, yeah, at the moment, it kind of sounds like I want to understand how we're going to support cloud provider testing moving out of tree, because these sorts of variances sound like they belong there. Unless I'm totally
As of now, I'm not aware of a...
Say again? We seem to have lost sound from you, Ben. But I'm guessing you were saying as of now, you're not aware of such an effort for cloud provider. But I would get the discussion started there. Okay. I got a yes to that. Okay. Antonio. So speaking of cloud provider testing.
Yeah. And this is, I want to share my experience and my conclusion so you can follow, you can get the content. So for IPv6, we decided we have to test it with kind. Kind is enough for some kind of testing, and we need to test it in one cloud provider so we have better sign-up, okay? Then I tried, talked with Justin Santa Barbara with Hobbs, checked cluster API, and checked other different projects. What's the problem is, that consumes a lot of time and it's very difficult to maintain because you most of the time you're maintaining this torrent. So the conclusion that I have is, well, I see this, what is the name, the cube app or this thing for DC, and I have one template that is you can spawn in Amazon, and it creates the cluster with 3-4 nodes for conformance with cloud in it, and it spawns the cluster and it runs the end-to-end test. It's a YAML file with the template and a cloud init scripts. You have the cluster and it runs the end-to-end test. So I wanted to know if this is something viable for testing, and if it's viable, how can I add this to Pro? You know, because it has to be in one repo. I'm saying this because nobody is maintaining this, and if I want to put a test, I want to put something that I can be able to maintain and to support. I don't want a job failing constantly. So I think that this is very simple, and I'm able to maintain it. I just need to run this CloudFormation template with the Cloud Init scripts, run the end-to-end test, and that's it.
Antonio, do you know if AWS properly supports dual stack on the provider side?
Yeah, I deploy it manually with my account, and this is the other problem. I don't have, I don't want to spend my money on Amazon to deploy clusters, but you can run, and this is the thing it's a Kubernetes cluster. It's not the Kubernetes with the Amazon integration and all the, it's the conformance test in a Kubernetes cluster in Amazon. That's why I'm saying that this is very limited scope. It's not a full IPv6 cluster integrated with Amazon. I know that the Azure people is working, and I try to work with that, but it's at the end it's an installer and has a lot of things that I don't have time to support that and to maintain that, and the development is complex.
The Cluster API provider for AWS, which is arguably the best maintained Cluster API provider, I think you can use that to pipe. It uses kubeadm. You can pipe all the dual stack configuration there.
I've already done that, Lubomir, and I had a patch. The problem is that when I did that, they were in Alpha 3. The problem is with Alpha 3 master, it was unstable because they have problems because when you add a new feature, it defaults to the V2, and I had a lot of panic. So I developed it in Alpha 2. But the problem is when I have it working in Alpha 2, they are moving to Alpha 4. That's what I'm trying to say. The problem is I just want sign-up of Kubernetes cluster in a cloud provider with IPv6. I don't want to create a new installer because it's like kind. You just need 2-3 nodes, and with kubeadmin is very simple.
And what was the story with COPS?
Well, I don't have time to catch up on another provider. I asked it to Justin, and he told me to open an issue and see if they have requests and they can work on that. But these things are time consuming, and the other problem is that you need to maintain it.
But your alternative is to write a custom deployer. Is that the case?
It's not a custom deployer. It's a kubeadmin it's a template with kubeadmin.
But how are we going to trigger this from a prod job? That's the question.
with the bash magic. Why did you ask?
So the two paths that I'm familiar with, one would be kubetest, which has a concept of a deployer, and you'd have to plumb through kubetest to add a new deployer.
Okay.
And that deployer would probably have to be a simple binary or bash or something in another repo, and you'd have to pass arguments to it. I know I've heard things like kubetest is deprecated, but it's still the thing that we use. I like Lubomir. I'm wondering if it would be possible to get the AKS engine folks to better support dual stack so you could plumb through that way. But okay, so the other option is, since you use the analogy to kind, we don't have the concept of a kind deployer through kubetest. Kind just has some wonderful bash scripts in the kind repo that launch a kind cluster. And so
that's actually Go now.
Okay.
Thankfully.
Some wonderful Go that does that. I agree with Catherine. I don't think kubetest is deprecated in any meaningful way, but
I think kubetest is entirely orthogonal to this problem. The problem is we need a reliable mechanism by which to get a cluster in the cloud with dual stack. So that means we need some actual cluster provisioning code that supports this.
Right.
Antonio lost a lot of time doing this to one of the cluster lifecycle projects, and it doesn't sound like the other projects are going to do this for us. How do we get this to be a thing that's actually going to be maintained? One route is we stick his cloud formation somewhere, and then kubetest or whatever interacts with that. Another is we say, no, we don't want another deployment thing that conversely also needs to be maintained, and it has to get into one of the existing ones somehow. I think it's pretty reasonable, at least in the short term, to hook up the CloudFormation thing and get some signal without necessarily committing to like anyone else supporting that long term. And I just don't think that the feature can go like GA or whatever, depending on this thing.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like it would be preferable to have one of cluster lifecycle's ways of deploying a cluster to support this. But throwing CloudFormation templates and the appropriate scripts to launch them in a separate repo and then plumbing that through to kubetest sounds like it could be feasible. The unknown for me is how you would, like, which build of Kubernetes are you picking to launch with these CloudFormation templates, and how are they going to pick that up, right?
Yeah, this is the nice thing, because the cluster API guys have some instances that they are building with the latest bits. So this is a temporary thing until the projects mature and they catch up. But I don't plan to. So I know that the Azure guys are working in something. But I just want to, you know, to try to get traction and see if people see that this is working, you know, they can move faster, because my thought is that if we have something working, sooner or later people is going to start to demand it. And this is how it works. If the project see demands, it's going to be, you know, 1 or 2 weeks is just put a developer to develop the feature. This is not a big deal. It's time.
The proposal you're suggesting with the custom new repository starts to sound like Kubernetes Anywhere, which is not so great.
That's why I'm sharing this. I know that you went through all of these things, and I want your advice here.
Yeah, my preference would be to continue pushing for a cluster API way of doing things, but you can also pin images, and you can pin a version of the cluster API in the test, so you can stay in, you know, V1 Alpha 2 for a long time if you want. But
that's possible. Sorry.
I didn't understand what the problem. Did they not accept your patches?
Yeah, no, they are very helpful. The problem is that the project is moving too fast, you know, and I was assuming that they weren't going to maintain, you know, if I develop in Alpha 2 and they are in Alpha 4 and my patch is not in, I was assuming that they will ask me to redo it for Alpha 4. And the other thing is, what happens if they break something with Alpha 5 on when they move to beta? That are my concerns. You know, it's not just to have it working; it's to maintain it.
So, as a consumer, they are probably not going to break you dramatically, as long as you have your valid configuration for V1 Alpha 2. You can then transfer this, manually convert this to the next alpha. To my understanding, the next alpha is coming in July this year. So you have time to continue operating on this alpha. But yes, to my understanding, there's no automatic conversion between the manifests that you have to write for the proud job that are passed to the cluster API. But the images are going to be solid. So you pull an image, it's tagged, it's fixed. So I think the cluster API is the best approach here. And the folks respond to issues. So if you have questions, you can ask them on Slack.
Yeah, okay, I will try. So I think that was Tiberius working on that, no?
Yeah, possibly Jason or Vince. But on the side of VMware, I think maybe in the future we're going to see interest in this. So by doing this, they have to recognize the benefits for the future. So they have to help you in a way. That's what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, okay, that's fair enough. I said I just wanted to share the problem too, because I know that you went through all this kind of installer nightmare before. Okay, well, thank you very much for attending all these requests.
No problem. Thanks for putting them on our agenda. So, so what I heard was the compromise that sounds best is to talk with the cluster API folks and maybe accept that we pin to an older version of cluster API in the interim to avoid things moving too quickly for you. And that will reduce the cost of moving it up to a later version of cluster API, which they would be motivated to do because you've proven that it works and it delivers dual stack.
Yeah, I will try that. I have to check I have one patch working, so I have to recheck. Okay.
Okay. We've reached the end of our agenda. Does anybody else have anything they want to discuss?
I'm sorry, I thought about this in the last minute. So there was a kubeadm kept to move it out of KK, which is seeing a lot of discussion. But previously I discussed with Catherine and Steve a potential approach to, which is kind of complicated, to automatically tag different repositories within the Kubernetes org based on tag changes in KK. So KK push a new tag, we capture this in a proud job, and we start tagging repositories in the org, like for instance, the kubeadm repository. And the proposal from Catherine was to use a postal bit job. Previously, I discussed proud plugin with Steve, but they had a consensus that the postal bit job is the better approach. I guess my question here is, like, how do we even grant a postal bit job privileges to have write access on some of these repositories? Possibly using a token?
Yeah, I guess that's possible. This would require another proud job to run in the trusted cluster because it's using a special token. I'm kind of wondering what the overlap here is with the publishing bot, which also kind of, if I understand correctly, also acts based on tags in KK.
Yeah, I had a brief discussion with Dims about this, and he said that the publishing bot currently is doing that, but it also pushes source codes. So it's not only tagging commits, for instance, not tagging the latest commit. It's also bound to pushing source code, and we don't want that. We only want to tag or branch operations like that. So Dims basically told me that you shouldn't do this in the publishing bot, so we basically have to do it in a separate process.
Okay. I feel like some of the work that Eric has done with Prowly to use workload identity for containers may conflict with the desire to increasingly add more trusted functionality to, or more trusted jobs, but your proposal seems sound to me. I mean, a post submit in the trusted cluster would be the starting place, and we could figure out how to iterate from there. Like my personal preference would be to find a way to do this without potentially using Prow's GitHub token, but seeing if there's a more appropriate, more scoped GitHub token.
This sounds like something that could make sense as part of the actual release. Like isn't there a bot that does some tagging in an AAGo?
Yeah, so there's a chicken and egg problem there, because we pick a commit from Kubernetes using AAGo, and we release it, and then we tag it using AAGo again. But there's no way for the at this point, I think what you're suggesting is that AAGo should also tag the kubeadm repository.
Possibly, but even if it doesn't necessarily do that, we could follow the model, which I think is that there is they have a GitHub account that's used for that with a token. And I believe the security around that is that this is run in GCB. I think for that, it's actually kicked off by humans, but we have patterns for kicking that off from Prow as well.
Yeah. This again means that we have to, yeah, this can work. Right, but the problem I'm having with SIG release at the moment is that they don't want to touch AAGo at all. So
that is somewhat understandable.
Apparently the code that is doing the tagging in AAGo is concurrent, and there's some state stored in global variables and things like that. It's they don't want to touch it. And I was thinking, my question, I guess, is the addition to the trusted cluster something that is concerned to the extent that maybe we should really look for the alternative in AAGo?
Depends what's being added to the trusted cluster, but in general, we don't want any code in there that isn't owned by SIG testing. And we definitely don't want we don't want code running from other repos in it.
I see.
So,
right, but we do the thing where there is code owned by SIG testing that will run from the trusted cluster long enough to start something running in a project, per project owned GCB
yeah,
setup.
you can do that, but that requires you to set up your you need to then have a GCP project that has GCB set up and can somehow look up your secrets. But yes.
Yeah, there is some more effort there, but it also might put you in the closest thing to potentially getting this folded back into the main release pipeline later.
I see. And potential scripts maybe have to live in test infra with owners from SIG testing. This is my assumption.
If you have it run off to GCB, then your code that runs in GCB can be your own. If you run it in a trusted cluster, we have to own it and we have to be the sole approvers on it.
I see. And in terms of approvers of the Prow YAML itself?
Also us.
Right, but if you do the GCP route like we've been doing for image pushing, then you kind of set up the Prow YAML once and don't really touch it again. And the rest of the spec of what happens is in the cloud build in your repo.
Yeah.
But how would we be passing the appropriate GitHub token to GCB?
You can have secrets in GCB, although how we get them there is another question.
I mean,
yeah, the nicest thing there is that it's a little bit stronger multi-tenant. The other thing is that we can actually hand people access to these. Where GroupKits Infra gives you a project, and whereas kind of the trusted cluster is all eggs in a basket. Especially given that the trusted cluster is not only trusted build jobs, but Prow itself.
There is also a part of me that feels like this is, whether it's an AAGo or whatever the release engineering team wishes to replace an AAGo with, it's functionality that I would want to see in that tool, because it's unclear to me how that would be capable of supporting release artifacts from multiple repos without this level of functionality.
Yeah, there are major concerns with AAGo. Otherwise, it definitely feels like the place to add this. Also, I would like to mention that apparently SIG storage have a similar demand. They want to break a repository, or rather, the repository is already out there. They want to tag it and branch it synchronized to KK for some reason. So I guess this is not only SQL/Cycle/KubeADM demand at the moment.
This sounds like a SIG release discussion.
Yeah, I would start there.
Yes,
so and GCP is available as a fallback, but it sounds like a workaround and not an integrated solution.
I see. So SIG testing does not like this approach of a proud job, essentially, for this.
I think it's more I have concerns about a release pipeline for a multi-repo release consisting of multiple different proud jobs. But yeah, I think we should talk about some kind of KEP to support this, to support both your needs and SIG Storage's needs with the SIG release folks.
All right, thank you. It is already part of that in the KubeADM KEP, but we don't have yet this global proposal for potential future consumers. Like kubectl also may want to do this.
Right.
Maybe the kublets more likely, because kubectl are going to use a separate version.
Okay. I want to give the remaining time over to Ankit to discuss his doc on Prow's HMAC management redesign, or GitHub token redesign.
Hey, thanks, Aaron. For people who don't know, Ankit, I just recently started working in this team. So there was a incident about first week of December where the HMAC token, which is used in webhook configuration, was leaked. And as a result, it needed to be rotated for obvious security reasons. And during that process, there's a lot of pain points were identified that just the blast radius being really high. The process of rotating is you have to rotate the master token, all the webhooks. And so there was an action item, there was a bug created, so how can we make sure that this never happens again? And the design doc is kind of as a proposal to solve that problem. And let me just share the link here as well. Have shared the link over the document which Aaron added earlier. So the goal here is just to give a quick design overview. The goal here is to not have a master token, like a global token anymore. Everything would have there would be a global token, but all the repositories or organization will have their own token. So if, let's say, there's an organization wants to onboard Brow, they would have their own organization specific token. And if they want, or if, let's say, so there are hierarchy of token. Global level, maybe just for backward compatibility, organization level, and on then repository level. If there are organizations which may decide that, hey, we want to maintain a different token for every repository, they can choose to do that. And we would be using the most specific token configured for that organization or repository. So if, let's say, a repository has a repository specific HMAC token, then they cannot authenticate their webhooks using global token or organization based token. They have to use the repository based token. So the benefit of this would be that, if a token gets leaked, then of course only that repository or organization is compromised. is affected for the time period. And also the way, so we can go look at the design document if people want, or we can I can just give a little overview and then folks can take a look at it offline. What sounds like a better idea? Because a whole lot of it I'm going to mention might be better suited along with the document.
I think with the 5 minutes we have left, an overview and review offline would be appropriate.
Okay, yeah. So
in particular, I address we're trying to solve some more problems than just isolating the HMAX, right? This will help onboarding and rotation and stuff like that. So it might be good to discuss all the objectives we're trying to meet.
Yep. So another thing with the rotation problem right now is because if let's say we have just one master token and we have, let's say, 20 or 30, like n number of organization using that single token, the moment you rotate your master token, all of the webhooks are broken because it's not a atomic operation to update all the webhooks out there. So how do you make sure that the rotation does not break anything even more momentarily? So having kind of a repository based or organization based token will allow you to first make that downtime much smaller. And in addition to that, what we are planning on doing is we are planning on saying that, hey, when you rotate a token, you can give your previous token, if you decide, you can give your previous token a little bit of expiration time. You can say, hey, expire my previous token after 5 minutes. So what will happen during that 5 minutes, you can go update your webhook afterwards, and your request from either of the two token will be validated for that 5-minute duration. So that takes away the pain of token just rotation. And what else do I want to mention here? And also this just goes with, and also, yes, another couple of things is right now the token management and updation is not completely automated. This is another thing as part of this change we want to do, is that as a on-call person or whoever is rotating token or onboarding a new repository or organization to to Prow, they won't have to copy the token and go to the GitHub UI, etc. We hope we will make changes and we will leverage the GitHub API completely to kind of make it a one command for whoever person is executing this workflow. They won't ever have to use leave their command line to configure this end-to-end webhook.
So with the goal for this my understanding is today the HMAC token that Prow uses lives in a single Kubernetes secret. Would the goal be to have this expanded list of multiple HMAC tokens also live in a single secret, or would we want to?
We considered separating them into multiple secrets, but honestly, it doesn't seem like there's a whole lot of benefit. And that's something that we can certainly do down the line, just support, loading multiple files essentially with all these configs. That being said, all the secrets are still in the cluster. I'm not sure what, we definitely considered that, and I'm not really sure that there's any benefit that we get from having them separate to separate secrets. The only reason that we want that is if we wanted people to be able to supply HMAX themselves and use some sort of secret store and allow people to have access to individual secrets. But that's something we don't have now. And two, I don't think that we need to have people supplying the HMAX because the tool will generate them itself.
Okay, thanks.
And also for backup and just maintenance, having a single secret would be better. That hey, we can update the file, we can upload it on Valentine or secret store. Think it could be just easier, so it'll be less overhead to just maintain that we don't lose our secret.
If we do see a reason to have multiple secrets down the line, though, this design doesn't block that.
Sorry?
If we do find a reason that we want multiple secrets down the road, this design doesn't really block that. We could always merge config files or yep, separate them some other way. So we're not really locking ourselves into that.
Okay. Any other questions for Ankit? All right. Thanks for sharing this design doc with us. This looks like a really useful feature for the resiliency of Prow. Having to avoid last-minute dashes to go recover everything. That is our time. Thank you all for showing up this week. We will see you in 2 weeks. I don't have the date in front of me, but looking forward to seeing you all then. Happy Tuesday.
See you later.
Thank you.
Bye.